Like, what would you do? Okay, to be clear, World War II has nothing to do with current events. In fact, many of the horrible policies of the United States, in my opinion, have to do with projecting World War II onto every single conflict in the world. Okay.
Agree.
But
Overlearning.
But it is an interesting extreme case. So just to clarify, I'm just like philosophically talking about at which point do you do military intervention? And that's a nice case. Maybe you have a better case study, but that's such an extreme one.
Yeah.
That it's interesting.
Are we talking about Germany or Japan?
Germany side, yeah.
So Japan attacked us and Germany declared war on us. Tough for them, and that's what happens when you declare war on the United States. You get hit, but
that was idiotic on the part of Hitler to declare war on the United States.
You know, I never understood why he ever did that. They always said it was just because he was crazy, but what it was is he was trying to get the Japanese to invade the Soviet Union from the east, and in order to divide Stalin's forces, which failed, and it didn't work, and it was a huge blunder from his point of view, I guess.
Philosophically, from an interventionism perspective, you're saying the United States should have stayed out from that war as long as possible until they're attacked.
Yes. I mean, and look at how powerful they ended up being and the amount of damage that they were able to inflict on the Soviets. Better them than us.
What do you think?
Look,
is this a useful discussion?
It's interesting. I mean, I think it's interesting of
philosophically,
libertarianism or isolationism in practice. I mean, I think the 30s are more interesting to me than what happened between 39 and 45. I think the debate in America was very interesting in the 30s, where there was really a strong isolationist movement, with Charles Lindbergh and Henry Ford and Father Coughlin and many.
Joe Kennedy.
Yeah, and Joe Kennedy. I mean, they defined themselves as sort of America firsters, but it was very much an isolationist strain. And I think, we can talk about that history. And
Coughlin was a New Dealer, not a right-winger.
Anyway. Very much an isolationist, talking about America having to stay out, these entangling alliances. This is not our war. Emotionally understandable, right? Because you can also overlearn the lessons of World War I, right? And I think they overlearned the lessons of World War I. I mean, which was a brutal war and a devastating war, mostly for Europe, but obviously for the United States. We lost thousands of American men and women. So the 30s was this big debate between those who saw the gathering storm of what was happening with Nazi Germany and those who wanted to keep America out. And I think in some respects, it's like today with the contemporary reality with Khamenei, is that because these isolationist voices were so prominent and so vocal, and in some cases quite persuasive to American leaders, Hitler calculated that the United States would not enter the war. And so he could do what Scott says. He could focus on the Eastern Front. He could gather his forces, and then he could do a kill shot on the Western democracies in Western Europe. And the United States would not intervene. I mean, you're right that the big mistake he makes is declaring war on the United States after Pearl Harbor. But he believes all through the 30s and before Pearl Harbor that the isolationist voices are keeping FDR from entering the war, even while Churchill and the Brits and the French and others are imploring the Americans, not only to just to provide them with material support, with weapons, so that they could hold on to the island and defend themselves. And I think Hitler miscalculates. In the same way, I think Khamenei miscalculates. Khamenei heard the debate over the past number of years. He believed that this sort of isolationist wing of the Republican Party, right, represented, I think, by Tucker Carlson and others who have been very anti-intervention with respect to Iran. I think he believed that that was the dominant voice within Trump's MAGA coalition, and that as a result, the United States would not use military force. So in the same way that Hitler miscalculated the influence of the isolationists on FDR, Khamenei misjudged the influence of the isolationists on Trump, and both ended up miscalculating to their great regret. So to me, that's the sort of parallel between kind of World War II in the 30s and the prelude to World War II and what we're seeing in the in the current reality over the past few weeks.
To make clear, you mentioned there's a parallel, but mostly there's no parallel. It's a fundamentally different.
Absolutely.
There will never be a war like that. And
It's a real problem, too, because they always say everybody's Hitler, all enemies are Hitler, and to compromise with them at all is to appease Hitler, and you can never do that.
Agreed.
And they do that to Manuel Noriega, to David Koresh, to Saddam Hussein, to whoever they feel like demonizing and
Hitler
saying
was
is
unique,
too
evil.
crazy to negotiate with. When, let's get real, and I think we're agreed about this probably, that right in 2002, W. Bush could have just sent Colin Powell, the four-star general, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Secretary of State, to read the Riot Act to Saddam Hussein and tell him, look, man, you help keep al-Qaeda down and we'll let you live, and everything would have been fine. And in fact, just like Saddam Hussein, and there's a great article by James Risen.
I don't agree.
Hang on now. There's an article by James. There's an article by James Risen in the New York Times, and there's another one by Seymour Hersh as well about how Saddam Hussein offered to give in on everything. He said, you want to search for weapons of mass destruction, you can send your army and FBI everywhere you want. You want us to switch sides in the Israel-Palestine conflict, we'll stop backing Hamas. You want us to hold elections, we'll hold elections. Just give us a couple of years. If this is about the oil, we'll sign over mineral rights. This is James Risen, New York Times. They sent an emissary to meet with Richard Pearl in London. That was who was the chair of the Defense Policy Board and was a major ringleader of getting us into Iraq War II. And then I don't know why, this is a real mistake. You want to talk about Saddam's mistakes. Why does he always send his guys to meet with Richard Pearl? Because there was a Saudi businessman, a Lebanese businessman, I think, that they tried to get to intervene as well, who again offered virtually total capitulation. And Pearl told him, tell Saddam we'll see you in Baghdad. After he was attempting to essentially unconditionally surrender. The same thing happened with Iran in 2003. Right after America invaded, they issued what was called the Golden Offer, which the Bush administration buried, and they castigated the Swiss ambassador who had delivered it. But in the Golden Offer, and you can find the PDF file of it online, they talk about, we're happy to negotiate with you our entire nuclear program, which didn't even really exist yet, but nuclearization. We're willing to negotiate with you about Afghanistan and Iraq, because again, they hated Saddam Hussein and wanted rid of him too. So they're perfectly happy to work with us on Afghanistan and Iraq. And they had captured a bunch of bin Ladenites and they were willing to trade them for the MEK. And that included one of bin Laden's sons and another guy named Atef, both of whom the Iranians held under house arrest for years. And it was only in the, I think, late Obama.
And they were giving refuge to al-Qaeda. And the CIA said this is a key facilitation pipeline between Iran and al-Qaeda.
They were willing to negotiate a trade between these dangerous bin Ladenites and the MEK, and America refused to negotiate that. And it was years later when the bin Ladenites abducted some Iranian diplomats in Pakistan that they then traded them away to get their diplomats back. And Atef, I think bin Laden's son ended up being killed not long after that, Hamza, but and Atef too. But both of those dangerous terrorists were released and were involved in terrorism between then and the time that they were later killed, I think within a couple of years of that. So the Hawks always like to say, oh yeah, Iran gives such aid and comfort to al-Qaeda and all that. There's a great document at the Counterterrorism Center at West Point where they debunk all of that.
Yeah, there's a 9/11 report by the 9/11 Commission. There's a 9/11 Commission report, people can Google it, which talks about the cooperation between Iran and al-Qaeda.
Only in Bosnia when they were doing a favor for Bill Clinton.
Beyond that, and the CIA released thousands of pages of classified material that they declassified, showing the relationship between Iran and al-Qaeda. The U.S. Treasury Department under Obama and under Trump actually designated a number of Iranian individuals for facilitating al-Qaeda. So anyway, I mean, these are important facts. But I actually...
You mentioned Baghdadi and Soleimani in the same breath a minute ago, and they're deadly enemies. And it was Soleimani's Shiite forces in Iraq War III that helped destroy the
enemy of my
caliphate
enemy is my friend.
With America flying air power for them.
The greatest era that we've made in the Middle East is this notion, not the greatest, but one of the greatest, is this sort of conceptual era that somehow Sunnis and Shiites don't work together and Iran doesn't work with
Well, I
Al
didn't say that.
Qaeda. I'm not saying you say that, but many people think that. And of course they do work. They hate each other. But of course they work together because they hate us more. But can I just say something, Lex? Because I actually think, just stepping back from like all of this detail,
The more we start to zoom out now, the better.
yeah,
So
I'd like to
what-
zoom out a little bit. I think the lessons for me, over 22 years on working on these issues, is one must learn about the mistakes that we've made in Iraq and in Afghanistan and Libya. Okay? One must learn about the mistakes that we made in Vietnam, mistakes that we made in World War II.
So we can make them all over again in
Well-
Iran this time.
Can I finish, or
Go
are
ahead.
you good?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right. So I think that what President Trump is trying to do is learn, but not overlearn. Right? I think he understands the mistakes that have been made. I think he's trying to rectify those mistakes. And he also understands that American power is important. It is a force for good in the world, even though we have made major mistakes. I think there's a great danger among certain people to believe that no power should ever be exercised, that all American power is a bad thing and a destructive thing. And sometimes to confuse major tactical decisions, right, that have been made, whether it's been made by the Brits in World War II or the Americans or us or whoever it is in whatever war, with the fact that there is a strategic reality that we always have to be conscious of, and that we have enemies. Right? This is not the Garden of Eden yet. I hope the libertarians create one. I want to go live there when they do, and Scott and I will be neighbors, believe it or not, living in that Garden of Eden together. But there are major threats in this world, and we need to find the right balance between the overuse of military power and the underuse of military power. If we want to avoid wars, we have to have serious deterrence, because our enemies need to understand we will use selective and narrowly focused, overwhelming military power when we're facing threats like an Iranian nuclear weapon. That is a serious threat. It's a serious threat to us. It's a serious threat to the region. It's a serious threat with respect to proliferation around the world. And I think with that respect, I think President Trump's decision to drop bombs on 3 key nuclear facilities was a selective, targeted military action that I hope will drive the Iranians back to the negotiating table, where they can negotiate finally the dismantlement of their nuclear weapons program. Right? I
They
think
don't
there's a
have a nuclear
danger.
weapons program.
Again, we've had a 4-hour debate on this, so I'm sure if you want to rewind, you can listen to all our arguments once again. But the fact of the matter is that our unwillingness to use power, if we're never going to use power, all that's going to do is send a signal to our enemies that they can do whatever they want. They can violate whatever agreements they want. They can use aggression against anyone they want. And I think that puts American lives in danger. And we've seen the results of that, where we delayed and delayed and delayed, and we didn't move too early, and we didn't preempt, and the threat grew, and we ignored the gathering storm. And so I think the lessons of 100 years of American military involvement is, if you have an opportunity early on, as the storm is gathering, to use all instruments of American power, with the military one being the last one you use, then deter when you can and strike when you must, in order to prevent the kinds of escalation and wars that everybody at this table, and I'm sure everybody listening in your audience, is seeking to avoid.
On that topic, question for both of you, Scott. If human civilization destroys itself in the next 75 years, it probably most likely will be a World War III type of scenario, maybe a nuclear war. How do we avoid that? We've been talking about Iran, but there'll be new conflicts. There's Ukraine, China,
Kashmir.
Yeah. North Korea.
No, yeah.
Don't forget North Korea.
Yeah, I mean, there was a time when North Korea was the biggest threat to human civilization, according to
We could have had a deal, except John Bolton ruined it.
So that's the bigger question. not so much in the specifics.
Oh, I mean the second time. He ruined the Clinton deal of 94. Then he ruined the Trump deal of 2018. Or
Maybe the North Korean dictator ruined it. But again, one doesn't want to blame our enemies for their mistakes.
Well, you know, at the second meeting, Trump sent John Bolton to Outer Mongolia so that he couldn't sit at the table and ruin the deal. But what happened then? The Democrats had his lawyer testify against him while he was at the meeting. And they had this huge propaganda campaign that Kim Jong-un is going to walk all over Trump and take such advantage of him. And they made it virtually impossible for him to walk away claiming a victory.
Scott, do you ever blame the enemy? Ever? Do you ever blame the enemy?
North Korea is not my enemy.
North Korea is not your enemy.
No.
Really? They build nuclear weapons, ICBMs that target America.
That's George Bush and John Bolton's fault. I already said that.
Whatever fault it is, the fact of the matter is, do you ever blame an American adversary? Or is it always our fault?
In fact, what happened
is
was...
it always our fault?
See, all you can do is characterize, but you don't want to talk about the details. The details are that Stephen Biegun, who worked for Donald Trump, gave a speech and said, you know what? We can put normalization first and denuclearization later.
I know him very well.
Then Donald Trump brought John Bolton to the meeting, and he prevented that from being the message of the meeting.
So it's always
ruined the deal.
Always John Bolton's fault.
Yes, that's right. It's all John Bolton's fault. Because how reasonable does it sound to you, Lex? Give up all your nuclear weapons first, then we'll talk about every other issue. Does that sound like a poison pill, or that sounds like a reasonable negotiation? Give me a break.
Sounds like a beginning of a negotiation.
But yeah. Well, they got nowhere.
Well,
because Trump brought John Bolton with him and helped to ruin it.
And maybe they went nowhere because the North Korean dictator, at the end of the day, is a dictator who wants to threaten the United States with ICBMs and nuclear. Listen, you're criticizing the sequential decisions made in negotiation. I'm asking you a serious question after hours of talking.
Okay.
Which I must say I've really enjoyed. I've learned a lot.
I enjoyed it.
I think there's been areas of agreement, obviously real disagreement. But here's the question to you. Like, really, I mean, do you ever hold our adversaries responsible? Or do you just don't think we have any adversaries?
This is ridiculous. The topic has been,
tell me,
from your point of view, it's all the adversaries, and all America and Israel are trying to do is survive and fix the situation the best they can.
I think I've acknowledged
and I'm refuting that
mistakes
by bringing up all the
Yeah.
things that America and Israel have done to make matters worse. I didn't ever say that the Ayatollah is some great guy, or that Kim Jong-un is some hero, or like any
But do
kind
you
of
think
thing
they're a
to spin
threat to
for their
America?
side.
Are they a threat to America?
No, of course not. As Zbigniew Brzezinski said
They're
in
not a threat to America.
1993,
Wow.
we could have perfectly normalized relations then. You talk about Iranian support for Al-Qaeda. Iran supported Al-Qaeda in Bosnia
That's the bottom
in
line.
1995 as a favor to Bill Clinton, because they were trying to suck up to the United States.
I
is
understand
why
it.
they supported
I understand
Al-Qaeda.
it. Your
in
position.
Bosnia
Your
there.
position.
Yes,
your
my position is whatever you say it is, not what I say.
No, I'm just talking. I'm trying to summarize.
You know who's the last person who told me I need to beware about overlearning the lessons of Iraq? It was Charlie Savage from the New York Times, when the subject was his absolute ridiculous hoax that Russia was paying the Taliban to murder American soldiers in Afghanistan in 2020, which ruined Trump's potential, which he was floating trial balloons about withdrawing in the summer of 2020, which would have absolutely
Scott, you said
the Joe Biden era catastrophe.
You said it.
And Charlie Savage, who published these ridiculous lies,
Scott,
that were later refuted by the general in charge of the Afghan war, the head of CENTCOM, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the director of Central Intelligence.
As much detail as possible.
He told me, you know what your problem is, Horton, is you have overlearned the lessons of Iraq War II. But it turned out those lessons were perfectly apt for Charlie Savage's hoax. It wasn't true what Charlie Savage said. You know what he resorted to? He said, well, it's true that there was a rumor I was reporting on.
Scott, you made it very clear America has no adversaries.
That's called learning the lessons of Iraq, not overlearning them.
All right. So I guess the answer to the question I asked about avoiding World War III is the two of you becoming friends. That's my goal. If we can try to find the light at the end of the tunnel, one last question. What gives you hope, to the degree of hope about the future? What gives you hope about this great country of ours.
Well,
And humanity, too.
yeah, I mean, look, there are a million wonderful things about this country, the land, the people, our culture, and our resources and everything. And the kind of society that we could build in not with a controlled system, but with just a pure free market capitalist system in this country where people are allowed to own their property, improve its value, and exchange it on the market and build this country up, we would be living in comparatively a paradise compared to what we have now. And if you look at the opportunity costs just since the end of the Cold War on all that has been wasted on militarism in the Middle East especially, but also in Eastern Europe and in East Asia, all of that wealth put here could have gone much more to something like perfecting our society. It's always an unfinished project, so that then we really have something to point to the rest of the world and say, this is how you're supposed to do it, not like that. I think it's crucial that for all of the problems that Somalia, Syria, Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan have, the worst thing about those countries is America's wars there. It's what we have done to them as the worst thing about those places. So we're not in much of a position to criticize, whatever horrible and political practices, cultural and things about their societies that we would like to criticize when the worst chaos that's happened to them has been inflicted by our country against them, virtually all in wars of choice that were unnecessary from the get-go.
What gives you hope?
What gives me hope? I think, first of all, I have a lot of hope and confidence in the wisdom of the American people. I think Americans understand, at the end of the day, that they need leaders who are about making America great again. I think they elected Donald Trump, who is flawed in many, many ways. But I think Trump is wrestling with some of the questions that we have been wrestling with for the past 5 hours. I think that I think most Americans know that we have adversaries, and it's just overwhelming numbers of Americans understand that. They may disagree on exactly who is an adversary and how you rank them, but they know we have adversaries. I think the third thing is Americans greatly admire the men and women in uniform. I mean, I think the institution with the greatest popularity in America still remains the U.S. military, while many of other institutions are failing the American people and are reflected in the polling. I think we've got to be very judicious about how we use this incredibly powerful military, because most importantly, it comes down to, it's not about weapons and technology, it's about the people. It's about the men and women who have sacrificed their lives to serve our country. At the end of the day, if we understand we have adversaries, we're careful about how we use our military, we understand the importance of forward deterrence in order to actually confront threats before they become so severe that we ended up plunging ourselves in a war. I agree totally with Scott in terms of how we use our money and how judiciously we have to guard it. I agree with how we've run up these massive debts, and we have to be actually, if we're serious and conservatives are really serious, they need to stop. They need to tackle these massive deficits. And it would be really easy if it was just all about the military and we could just kind of get rid of the Pentagon and all of a sudden we'd be running balanced budgets. That's not the case. We have much deeper structural economic problems in this country, and everybody knows that. And so we got huge challenges as a country. But I really believe, as I believe since I was a little kid, that America is the greatest force for good in the world, and that we make mistakes, sometimes tragic mistakes. We make huge miscalculations. And I think we will be much more clear in how to rectify those mistakes if we stop obsessing with these boogeymen that are out there, the Israelis, the Jews, the
Iranians.
Well, and we start focusing on our adversaries, which are not the Iranians, because the 80% of Iranians despise this regime. And Lex, I feel really bad that in 5 hours we actually haven't even talked about that in any detail.
Many of my friends are Iranian. They're beautiful people, and it's one of the great cultures on earth. Yeah.
And the only place they don't succeed in the world is inside the Islamic Republic. When they come to America and Canada and Europe, they're incredibly successful people. And 80% of Iranians despise this regime, and they long for a free and prosperous Iran. And so it's a big question that they're ever going to get there, and who knows the right way to get them there. But at the end of the day, I am convinced that the vast majority of Iranians are our friends, but there is a regime that has been trying to build nuclear weapons, has been engaged in terrorism for decades, has killed and maimed thousands of Americans and our allies. And it's a regime that has to be stopped. And I think Donald Trump, in the past couple of weeks, I would argue in the past number of months, has tried to play a strategy, try to figure out a way to offer the Iranians negotiations and a peaceful solution to this, but use overwhelming military power recently against Iran's nuclear sites in a very targeted way in order to send a message to the Islamic Republic of Iran that they cannot continue to build nuclear weapons and threaten America. And so I hope that things will work out well on this. I've always said curb your enthusiasm, because we have still a lot of pieces that still need to fall into place. And this is going to be a windy road as we try to figure this out. I'm hoping for the best, preparing for the worst, and want to thank you very much for having me on the show. Scott, it was a real pleasure to meet you. I enjoyed the debate. Very lively. I admire your dedication to the issue and your attention to detail. And I think all of that speaks well of you and your commitment and your passion for this. So thank you.
Deeply grateful that you guys will come here. This is really mind-blowing. Also that you have, it's silly maybe to say, but the courage to sit down and talk through this, through the tension. I've learned a lot. I think a lot of people are going to learn a lot. I'm a fan of both of your work, and it means a lot that you come here today and talk to a silly kid like me. So, Scott, thank you so much, brother. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Lex. Appreciate it.
Bam.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks for listening to this debate between Scott Horton and Mark Dubois. To support this podcast, please check out our sponsors in the description and consider subscribing to this channel. And now, let me leave you with some sobering words on the cost of war from Dwight D. Eisenhower. For some context, Eisenhower was the 34th president of the United States, but before that, during World War II, he was the supreme commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force, orchestrating some of the most significant military operations of the war, with leadership marked by strategic and tactical brilliance. It is in this context that the following words carry even more power and wisdom, spoken in 1953. Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies, in the final sense, a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed. This world in arms is not spending money alone. It is spending the sweat of its laborers, the genius of its scientists, the hopes of its children. The cost of one modern heavy bomber is this: a modern brick school in more than 30 cities. It is 2 electric power plants, each serving a town of 60,000 population. It is 2 fully equipped hospitals. It is some 50 miles of concrete highway. We pay for a single fighter plane with 500,000 bushels of wheat. We pay for a single destroyer with new homes that could have housed more than 8,000 people. This is not a way of life at all, in any true sense. Under the cloud of threatening war, it is humanity hanging from a cross of iron. And now, allow me to add some additional brief excerpts. In 1946, Eisenhower said, "I hate war, as only a soldier who has lived it can. only as one who has seen its brutality, its futility, its stupidity. In 1950, Eisenhower said, "Possibly my hatred of war blinds me so that I cannot comprehend the arguments they adduce. But, in my opinion, there's no such thing as a preventative war. Although the suggestion is repeatedly made, none has yet explained how war prevents war. Worse than this, no one has been able to explain away the fact that war creates the conditions that beget war." And finally, an excerpt from Eisenhower's farewell address in 1961 on the military-industrial complex. "A vital element in keeping the peace is our military establishment. Our arms must be mighty, ready for instant action, so that no potential aggressor may be tempted to risk his own destruction. American makers of plowshares could, with time and as required, make swords as well. But now we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. This conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. Yet, we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. In the councils of government, we must guard against an acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. Thank you for listening, and hope to see you next time.